Very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity this afternoon to address a matter of critical importance to the health and future of our democracy: the dangers posed by corruption. A democratic government is founded on the principles of accountability, transparency, and trust. When these principles are eroded by corruption, the very fabric of democracy is eroded as well, and public confidence in institutions is undermined. History offers numerous examples of how corruption has tested long-standing democracies and the strength of democratic institutions. History has a lot to teach us about this very real problem. And as the saying goes, those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it. One of the most iconic symbols of corruption in modern-day governance has to be the administration of U.S. President Richard Nixon and his infamous Watergate scandal. The Watergate scandal consisted of Richard Nixon's staff hiring burglars to break into the Democratic Party's headquarters to plant listening devices in their phones. When the burglars got caught, Nixon's re-election campaign paid them to stay quiet. Eventually, a Senate committee was established to investigate the matter. When the Senate committee requested that Nixon hand over audio tapes of his White House meetings, Nixon initially refused. Then he ordered his Attorney General to fire the special prosecutor who was requesting the tapes. Only after a Supreme Court ruling did Nixon eventually relent and hand over the tapes, all of the tapes unedited and unredacted. Shortly after, President Nixon resigned in disgrace. While it's good that in this instance the corruption was stopped and the bad actor resigned, the effects were long-lasting in democracies all around the globe, including Canada. Ever since, people have become very cynical and distrustful of politicians and assume that those in power prioritize personal or partisan gain over the public interest. People assume that politicians routinely engage in bribery, embezzlement, and influence peddling. These actions, whether they are real or merely perceived, erode public trust, distort policymaking, and diminish the legitimacy of government. In democratic systems, citizens must entrust their elected representatives with the authority to make decisions on their behalf. When this trust is violated, the repercussions are severe. Voter apathy increases, polarization deepens, and public cynicism grows. Canada, like any democracy, has experienced its share of corruption scandals. And while no political party and no government is immune to such scandals, this current Liberal government has taken these scandals to another level. The SNC-Lavalin affair brought renewed scrutiny to the Liberal Party under this Prime Minister. This controversy involved allegations that senior officials in the Prime Minister's office attempted to interfere with the judicial process to secure a deferred prosecution agreement for SNC-Lavalin, a major engineering firm facing criminal charges. When Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould refused to go along with the deferred prosecution agreement, the Prime Minister removed her from the position of Attorney General, in a move reminiscent of when Richard Nixon ordered his Attorney General to fire the special prosecutor who was requesting the White House tapes. Fortunately, Jody Wilson-Raybould blew the whistle and went public with allegations that she had faced undue pressure to intervene in the SNC-Lavalin case. While this Prime Minister denied any wrongdoing, the Ethics Commissioner ultimately found his actions violated ethics rules. The affair raised serious questions about the independence of Canada's judiciary, the accountability of elected officials, and the influence of corporate interests on public policy. Unfortunately, this Prime Minister chose to violate the fundamental democratic principles of accountability, transparency, and trust, instead of simply coming clean with Canadians. Another recent example is the We Charity scandal, in which this Liberal government awarded a sole source contract worth $900 million to the We Charity to administer a completely unnecessary grant program for students who did volunteer work. It later emerged that this Prime Minister and then Finance Minister Bill Morneau had personal ties to the charity, raising concerns about conflicts of interest. Both the Prime Minister and Bill Morneau faced investigations by the Ethics Commissioner, further damaging public trust. This scandal highlighted the dangers of conflicts of interest in government decision-making and the importance of rigorous ethical standards and the need for transparency in awarding public contracts. Without these safeguards in place, the trust that Canadians place in their democratic institutions is further damaged. The ArriveCAN app is another one of the Liberal government's recent scandals, complete with money disappearing in amounts that far exceeded what Richard Nixon paid to the Watergate burglars. This incident showed how the cover-up of criminal activity and lack of transparency in government operations can erode public trust. While the ArriveCAN app was initially developed as a tool to facilitate efficient border crossings, its rollout and associated costs raised serious concerns about government accountability, oversight, and the effective use of taxpayers' money. According to the Auditor General, the ArriveCAN app cost over $54 million, while other vendors estimate that they could have done the work for about $200,000. Madam Speaker, when you have a relatively straightforward $200,000 app that balloons in cost to $54 million, that cannot be due to simple incompetence or mismanagement. The only explanation is criminal activity. This government should have called in the auditors immediately. They should have called the police, but only after months of audits, committee meetings, and investigations was the truth finally brought to light. Madam Speaker, we've also seen the principles of accountability, transparency, and trust eroded by the most recent scandal, what I will call the Other Randy scandal. The Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre owned and operated a medical supply company which bid on government contracts while he was a cabinet minister. The member's business partner in this two-person business informed a client he was providing updates to someone known as Randy. Then he said that he meant another Randy. And to date, despite being asked repeatedly in question period, the member for Edmonton Centre has never identified who this other Randy may be. That's because, Madam Speaker, everyone knows that this member was violating ethics rules and was in a conflict of interest. But, Madam Speaker, even this was not enough to warrant his dismissal from Cabinet. It was only after it was discovered that the member's company was self-identifying as wholly Indigenous-owned while bidding on government contracts that the member for Edmonton Centre was removed from Cabinet. Just like Richard Nixon, the member for Edmonton Centre was desperate to cling to power regardless of the harm he was causing to the public trust and the reputation of our democratic institutions. Once again, the principles of accountability, transparency, and trust, all broken under this Liberal government. The actions of this Liberal government over the last 9 years have led to an erosion of public trust in our democratic institutions. More and more citizens perceive that their government prioritizes partisan or personal gain over the public good. This government's actions have led to a weakening of democratic institutions. Corruption undermines the independence and integrity of democratic institutions, such as the judiciary and public service. The SNC-Lavalin affair in particular raised concerns about political interference in the judicial process the absence of which is a cornerstone of democratic governance. This government's actions have led to an increase in voter apathy. Scandals contribute to voter disengagement by fostering a sense of futility and disillusionment. People see a few crooked politicians on the news and assume that they are just the tip of the iceberg and that all politicians must be corrupt. This is particularly dangerous in a democracy where active participation is essential to hold leaders accountable. Madam Speaker, robust mechanisms need to be in place to ensure transparency and accountability in government. Independent bodies, such as the Auditor General and the Ethics Commissioner, play a critical role in identifying and addressing corruption. But when these institutions discover problems and ring alarm bells, the government cannot simply sweep the matter under the carpet or let reports sit on a shelf to collect dust. Madam Speaker, the rules must be followed and wrongdoers must be held to account. And that, Madam Speaker, brings us to the Liberals' most recent scandal and the subject of this afternoon's debate: the documents pertaining to the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund that the Liberals refused to hand over. Earlier this year, the Auditor General released a scathing report on Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, and its mismanagement of public funds. Here are some of her findings. $334 million over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. A staggering $58 million was handed out to ineligible projects. And what were these projects? Some of them didn't develop a single new technology. Others made outlandish claims about their environmental benefits that couldn't stand up to the slightest scrutiny. Yet they were funded. And let's not forget, Madam Speaker, that the Auditor General looked at only a sample of SDTC transactions, a sample. She looked at roughly half of the transactions and found that 82% of them were conflicted. We can easily surmise that the remaining cases were just as conflicted and that the sums of money involved were hundreds of millions of dollars more. In December of 2023, a whistleblower testified before the House of Commons Committee. In one particularly stark statement, the whistleblower said, quote, "Just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement at SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization," unquote. Madam Speaker, enough is enough. Just as Richard Nixon finally relented and handed over the tapes related to the Watergate scandal, it's time for the Liberals to do the same. It's time for the unredacted documents related to the SDTC scandal to be handed over to the RCMP so they can do their job and get to the bottom of this. Madam Speaker, democracy is fragile and vulnerable, and it is a system of government that requires constant vigilance to preserve. Corruption, whether it occurs in Canada or elsewhere, poses a grave threat to the principles of accountability, transparency, and trust that underpin our democratic institutions. As members of Parliament and as citizens of a democratic country, we must demand accountability from our leaders. That is exactly what we are doing here today. Let's learn from history and ensure that Canada's democracy remains resilient and true to its founding principles. It's time for the Liberals to hand over the documents. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments?
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member opposite for his speech just now, and it's ironic and interesting that he highlights Nixon, Watergate. He highlights how democracy must be protected. Nixon is a shame on democracy. And he also highlighted how public institutions we must protect them and have faith in our democracy. But how can Canadians trust when the leader of the official opposition refuses to get his security clearance? It's ironic that we mention Nixon, but at the same time, the leader of the opposition is refusing to be security cleared. It boggles the mind. I don't get it. Thus far, I have not heard a satisfactory answer today in this chamber from the Conservative Party on why their leader refuses to be security cleared. I hope this member can answer that question.
The honourable member for Regina West Canada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the honourable member for his question. I've never had that conversation with the leader, but I would say that if the honourable member feels strongly about this issue, or if members of the government feel strongly about this issue, they can make that part of their legislative agenda. If they have ideas about enhanced security measures or enhanced security clearances that should be in place for any member of Parliament, they can table a bill to that effect. But in the meantime, we must deal with the situation that the Liberals refuse to address, and that is, why will they not hand over the SDTC documents to the RCMP so that the honourable member and this government can move forward with their legislative agenda however they wish that to look. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay. Questions et commentaires? Questions, comments? The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona. I'm sorry, Grisba. Edmonton.
No, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to thank my honourable colleague from Regina, Wisconsin. You know, when we first got elected to this place, I remember this member being quite hopeful to be able to represent the good people of Regina, Wisconsin. Since his time, however, we've seen him consistently repeat the message box from the leader of the opposition, and he hasn't at one time brought up the very real concerns of the people of Regina, Wisconsin. I know many of his constituents are disappointed by this. They're disappointed that he always reads from the script. They're disappointed that he has no voice in this chamber. They're disappointed that Conservatives keep whipping them and printing out sheets that tell them exactly what to say. So on behalf of the good people of Regina, Wisconsin, I ask this member to please focus on any one issue that would relate to the good people of Regina, Wisconsin, perhaps even the fact that his parents were teachers, and in Saskatchewan, there was a teacher's strike. He had not once stood up for the good people of Saskatchewan. Can he now today stand up for the people of Saskatchewan and call for fair wages for teachers?
The honourable member for Regina West Canada.
Oh, where to begin? Well, I would say that the voters of Regina Wascana don't like it when $400 million of taxpayers' money disappears. I don't know why the honourable member from Edmonton would think that that would possibly be okay. As for the biography that he obviously read on my website about my parents, yes, my parents are retired teachers. And if the honourable member is interested in schools and education policy, I would invite him to run in the next provincial election in his home province, because I strongly suspect after the next federal election, he'll be handing out resumes and looking for something to do.
The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the speech. The question that I have is, and he did talk quite a bit about the situation that happened at SDTC, and I'm wondering if he can just expand on the fact that, you know, what we're discussing and what the House is seized with is the fact that there have been over 180 instances of conflict of interest that were determined by the Auditor General. And the Auditor General actually didn't even audit all of the contracts that went through SDTC, and so it potentially could be even more. So when you're looking at the scope of this, how big this is, that this is potentially one of the biggest scandals in Canadian history, you can understand why the Liberals are not wanting to bring forth the documents. They're obviously trying to hide something, what documents they have, that they have been heavily redacted. And so I'm wondering if the member can just speak to just how big this is and how important this is right now in our Canadian history.
The honourable member for Regina West Canada.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I would like to thank the honourable member for the question and for all the good advocacy that she does on behalf of her constituents. Yes, it really is reminiscent of the Watergate scandal of the 1970s in the sense that, you know, there always seems to be more to this story, and there always seems to be more to this scandal. It's, as I mentioned in my speech, it's not just $400 million. That was just the sample that the Auditor General audited. So it is highly probable that it is much, much bigger than that. And I would say that the Watergate scandal of Richard Nixon looks like small potatoes compared to this scandal that is currently paralyzing this Parliament and paralyzing this Liberal government. And so I would say that this is an issue of corruption that has not received the attention it deserves in the general public, probably because Canadians have become so cynical of this government after the scandal and more scandal and more scandal that we've seen from them over the last several years.
The honourable member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Look, the member really highlighted the concerns around transparency and representing our constituents. I know when I've spoke, I highlighted, when I've spoke to this bill, or not this bill, this parliamentary privilege, I couldn't believe the amount of feedback when I asked my constituents about just how frustrated they are with this government's unwillingness to comply with this democratic chamber, the will of Parliament, in turning over the documents. In fact, over 91% of the people out of 500 plus replies I got back on this indicated they really think the government should, follow the will of Parliament. I'm just wondering, could he elaborate a little bit more, Madam Speaker, on what he's been hearing from his constituents in his great writing?
The honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank my honourable colleague for his question. And what I'm hearing from my constituents is that they have had enough of all of these Liberal scandals. I enumerated quite a few of them during my speech, whether it's SNC-Lavalin or the other Randy scandal or the ArriveCAN app. They all just blur together, and people say, we've lost confidence in this government, we've lost confidence in the Liberals, and it's time to call an election and send the Liberals out to pasture and bring in a new Conservative government. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to note first off that in the member from Regina, Wascana, in his response to the member in his same party from Kelowna Lake, said that Parliament is paralyzed, and it's paralyzed because of the actions of the Conservative Party that's happening right now. With respect to his answer to me, though, he said he has not yet had a conversation with his leader about why he is not getting security cleared. Will he commit to speaking with his leader to make sure that he gets security cleared and tell us why he is not doing so? Will you have that conversation with your leader?
No, I won't. The honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And let me be perfectly clear. The reason why Parliament has not moved forward with its legislative agenda is because the Liberals continue to block the handing over of documents to the RCMP. That's like saying that Richard Nixon filibustered Congress for not handing over his tapes. No, we have to comply with the law. The Liberal government has to comply with the law. If you see something, say something. If we see $400 million worth of corruption, we need to call in the RCMP so they can investigate this matter. As for talking with my leader, I think the honourable member is more than capable of doing so himself the next time he sees him.
The honourable member for Edmonton Grisba.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I obviously struck a nerve in my last question for the member who never speaks about Regina Wascana issues and only speaks from the talking points he's given from his leader. To that point, on the matter of the last question regarding security clearance, I think I need to lay this out very clearly for the member. The issues of national security are so critical and important that national leaders in our country get briefed on those particularly important details, and we don't release them publicly because our political adversaries, including Russia, would use that information against us. That is why we have a security clearance program in this country that allows for MPs and leaders to have and be cleared by that process to get confidential information on how that foreign interference could be impacting our parties. My leader took a security clearance, and we found no evidence of such thing. Why won't the Conservatives, and why are they hiding from a security clearance that they should be taking in order to protect
A very brief answer from the honourable member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I take considerable exception to the honourable member's statement that I never stand up for Regina Wascana or speak about Regina Wascana. During the pandemic, NAV Canada was planning to shut down the air traffic control tower at Regina International Airport. I advocated to keep it open. During the RCMP mass casualty...
I'm sorry, but we have run out of time.